Hello and welcome. Are you able to hear me okay? Great, thank you. Hi, I'm Jody Combs. I'm Interim Dean of Libraries here at Vanderbilt, and I'm happy to welcome you this afternoon to this wonderful event. It's great to look out and see all of these faces from the community, from our faculty, students, and staff, and the Nashville community, and to welcome you and be able to host you in this lovely room, which we designed to host events like this. We think of the library as the intellectual hub of the university, and this is the kind of event that we want to be able to host whenever we can. This event will, I wanted to mention though, first the room will be reconfigured later in the day. Those students that are with us will worry about this because reading days start tomorrow. This turns into a study space at that point, and it's sacrosanct. A few housekeeping notes. The restrooms are off the main lobby. If you go down to the right toward the elevators, you'll find them. And also a book signing and reception will follow our conversation here, and I hope you'll be able to stay and enjoy that. I also might mention that West End is a little congested right now, so you may want to think about that as you're planning your route home. Our moderator for the conversation this afternoon is Dr. Frye Gaillard, 1968 Vanderbilt graduate, and a member of the Vanderbilt Student Media Hall of Fame. He is writer-in-residence at the University of South Alabama. He's written extensively about American music, culture, and history. And Dr. Gaillard's relationship with Perry Wallace dates back to the late 1960s when they were students here. He's written about Wallace for Vanderbilt magazines and many, many other publications. And please join me in welcoming Dr. Frye Gaillard.
I've already lost my mic, however. Yeah, that's on good. Okay. Well, I'm delighted to be here and try to help facilitate a little bit of conversation between an author and his subject. And the subject, of course, is very close to our hearts here at Vanderbilt. It seems to me that it's especially appropriate that we are in the Jean and Alexander Hurd Library, because Chancellor Hurd was chancellor during Perry's time here and was responsible for guiding Vanderbilt from being a segregated institution to being an integrated institution, and became, I know, one of my heroes in the process of getting to know him, and I think Perry can talk about his own relationship with him in a little while. Andrew Maraniss is a public relations person by trade. He worked at Vanderbilt in that capacity after being a student here. Spent a season working as a public relations person for the Tampa Bay Devil Rays baseball team, and now is back in Nashville working at his own public relations firm. But he also has a little bit of printer's ink in his veins because his father was a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. And Andrew demonstrates in his book, Strong Inside, which if any of you who haven't read it yet, by all means get it today. I would just say that Andrew does justice to his subject, and that's a pretty high compliment given what he chose to write about. Perry Wallace, I'm going to introduce as my former classmate at Vanderbilt. I came to Vanderbilt in 1964, which was the year that the first African American undergraduates arrived at Vanderbilt. Some remarkable young people, and their very presence on campus started a conversation about America, about race, about the South, about what kind of place we wanted ours to be, what kind of campus we wanted ours to be. And then Perry arrived 2 years later as a pioneer. He was the first African-American basketball player in the Southeastern Conference, and that had all sorts of implications that we will talk about today. Perry is now, he teaches law at American University, environmental law at American University in Washington. He and I have talked several times since graduation, and so I was really delighted when I heard from Andrew that he was going to do a full-length treatment of Perry Wallace's story, both at Vanderbilt and beyond. I think I'd like to start with Andrew and ask you, just talk a little bit about what drew you to this particular topic. Why did you want to write this book in particular?
Okay, great. Well, this goes back 25 years for me. It was actually 25 years ago exactly on Thanksgiving this year that I turned in a paper on Perry Wallace to my professor, who is here in the back right of the room, Professor Yolette Jones. I'd like her to stand up, please. And I had read a magazine article about Perry. I had come here on the Fred Russell Grantland Rice Sports Writing Scholarship, so I was a kid that was really interested in sports. I was a history major. I saw something that brought together two things I was really interested in, sports and history, and I asked Professor Jones if it would be okay if I talked to Perry for a term paper for her class, and she really supported me in doing that. The article that I read that captured my attention described in its lead paragraph a scene at Mississippi State University in Starkville, Perry's first game down there, the first time any African-American players had ever played against either Ole Miss or Mississippi State. And at that time, there were freshman teams and varsity teams, and so Perry was on the freshman team along with one other black player at the time, Godfrey Dillard. And the scene in the first half of that game had been such an outrageous display of racism that Perry and Godfrey, these two young, strong athletes, held hands in the locker room to gain the strength to go back out there for the second half. And so, of course, that scene affected me. It's what interested me in Perry's story in the first place. Then fast forward to 8 years ago, I was standing in the kitchen at my in-laws' house and proclaimed that I wanted to write a book, but wasn't sure what I wanted to write about. And my father-in-law said, "You're always talking about Perry Wallace. Why not Perry Wallace?" So and I was like, "Of course," you know. And what a shame, though, that I still had that opportunity and that his story hadn't already been told in the book. But how lucky for me. And so I emailed Perry the next day and told him that this was something I was interested in doing, and would he support it, you know, and be willing to sit down for as many interviews as it would take. And it's been 8 years of interviews. And he said, yes, go for it. And I'm so happy that he gave me that blessing to do it.
Perry, how do you think it turned out?
Hold it.
I was beginning to maybe think that Vladimir Putin had sorry about that. I think it turned out magnificently. Andrew just did a wonderful job of rendering the story. And for someone who hadn't been born during that period, certainly did not live during that time, that he captured both my own life, captured the drama itself, and captured the times, and also had the intellectual honesty and courage to tell the story itself. So I think he did a wonderful job.
Good. Mm-hmm. For people who haven't read the book yet, and some here will remember those times very well and others may not, but talk a little bit, if you will, about that moment at Mississippi State, which was one of the most dramatic and in some ways horrific points in your journey as a basketball player and as a student athlete and as a civil rights pioneer. Talk to the people a little bit about what happened there to you and to Godfrey Dillard, if you would.
Well, of course, we got down there to Starkville, and it's useful to note that we didn't simply start off, the story didn't start at Starkville, the story started days, weeks, maybe months before, if not further, in the anxiety, the anticipation about the event. We had stepped into the unknown, and now the unknown had come to meet us in a more concrete form. And so we show up there in Starkville, and we move along to play this freshman game, and here we are in this small gym with these, with this hostile crowd, and up close and personal, small gym, outrageously bigoted, unabashedly bigoted, and who seemed to understand in the most instinctual of ways how to create a sense of fear, loathing, and destruction. They seem to have it coming out of their souls and their spirits and their hearts. And that's how it felt trying to play in a setting of that sort. So, of course, they called you all of the racist names, but there also were racist messages. And this would become sort of the template for many other places, not just the Mississippi schools, the Alabama schools, LSU and Georgia and other places. And so we got a chance to see what this was going to be like playing in the SEC. It obviously was a huge challenge, because as much of a challenge that we had both faced in our own ways in playing in competitive sports, this was like nothing else that we had ever seen. So we worked with it, and worked with it in our own different ways. Godfrey was the northerner. He was more brash, more willing to challenge and call out the players and the crowd. I was a southerner, and I knew the song of the South, of course. So we approached it different ways, and we were different, except that we were same in a fundamental way. And we struggled and worked with that event as best we could. But at that halftime, we had gotten our first douse of that huge and profound, transcendent hatred. Obviously, it shook us to the core, and we had to find the strength that we could. And so we did with each other. Instinctively, we were sitting side by side as the coach was describing the game plan, telling us what we needed to do in the second half, and we were listening, but we had that sort of parallel play, as the child development specialists call it. But the second part of it was how do we deal with this insanity? And particularly, and I'll finish with this, that nobody was saying a word. Nobody was saying, "Oh my goodness, oh my God, did you see that?" Or saying to us, "We saw that, we thought that was awful." And of course, nobody's saying, "Well, how are you holding up?"
When you talk a little bit about the decision to come to Vanderbilt and what your expectations were when you made that decision as compared to some of what you face in a moment like that. And I want to return in a minute also to the end of what you just said, but talk, if you will, a little bit about when you decided to come to Vanderbilt. Why did you? You could have gone to a lot of places. You had scholarship offers from all over the country. You were a star player. You were valedictorian of your high school class. So first of all, why Vanderbilt? And second, what were your expectations when you made the decision to come here?
Well, my plan had always been to get out of the South, which sounded like it made a lot of sense to me from what I had seen as a little boy. I didn't do a lot of talking to people about it, but I did look around in the South, and what I saw simply made no sense whatsoever. The conditions and that the human beings would not be able to live and function together, and the disparate conditions under which we lived. So my plan from about the age of 10 years old was to work hard, get a scholarship, and go to school up north or out west. And I wasn't the only one. That was the usual dream: go to a black college or university, or go up north or out west. Those were the only choices, by the way. And so I had that plan. And so in high school, with a number of scholarship offers, I visited many of the schools that I had dreamed about going to. And what I saw was disturbing, that even at universities that were excellent academic institutions, that the athletes, and I hope we can be real, the black athletes lived in an isolated situation, and they were athletes. And if there was student attached to student athlete, it was in lowercase, and athletes would be in uppercase. And that was a joke too. In so many of the instances, you had these guys basically were just new slaves on the new plantation, and I couldn't help but notice that. I was surprised and shocked, and then I saw a lot of other things. Now these are echoes of things that we see today. And it just gives a sense that these are not new problems that you read about today, problems of corruption, problems of funny money courses, problems of isolation of the athletes and such. These are problems that are decades old. So in the face of what I saw, it made me a lot more willing to entertain the idea of looking at a Vanderbilt University, where the athletes were really student athletes, where there was no physical education major, and where there was clearly an expectation that these athletes would be student athletes to take real courses and pursue real professional objectives as they moved into their own adult lives. And then there was a second and very important aspect that would be a big bonus. Now, all the while, there was the worry about what this would be all about and how dangerous it would be. But when I looked at these places up north, then the idea of being a new slave up north was not appealing. Again, I was more willing to look at Vanderbilt University. And then finally, there was the idea that, my parents and my family and my community could get a chance to see me, and very specifically for my parents to get a chance to have the great sense of victory in their own struggle in their lives, to be able to come across town and be respected and be called Mr. and Mrs. Wallace. Was a wonderful bonus in my thinking.
You mentioned that when you were being recruited by Coach Skinner, Roy Skinner, the basketball coach at Vanderbilt, that one of the things you noticed was that when he came to your house, he called your parents Mr. and Mrs. Wallace. It's remarkable today to think that would be remarkable then.
It's remarkable now. And I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to be cute, but the fact is that we're talking about respect among those who have been so richly disrespected. for so long. And so many times people don't even understand, that and the cultural difference of calling some black person who is 40, 50, 60 years old by his or her first name, and they may have worked to be called Mrs. or Ms. or Mr. this or that, and people get exercised about it, whether they express it or not. But it's quite an accomplishment. And just to have that extent of respect, and it's not that they're looking for validation, but it's great to have the respect, have that sense of respect. I don't know if I responded to you.
Yeah, no, you did. Mm-hmm. And before I get back to Andrew, let me ask you also, if you had these experiences at Mississippi State, later at Ole Miss, and other places off campus where the team went, there was also a double-edged reality to your life on the Vanderbilt campus as well. You kind of alluded to it in a way by saying that nobody in that halftime dressing room at Mississippi State said to you, "Oh my God, how this is terrible," or "Did you see that?" or whatever. Was that symptomatic of what you found to some extent on the Vanderbilt campus? Maybe more subtle and yet still not what you had hoped that you would find.
Sure. It wasn't, because but who knew? Who could know? And that was part of the bargain that I accepted, to go into a situation where there was a high degree of uncertainty, and that I was taking a chance. And in that sense, and even though I had a right to have expectations, and I had the right, and we had a right, we black students, to advocate for equal treatment, not special treatment, but equal treatment, then we found that on the campus that there was, and I repeated this, Andrew's had to hear this several times in all these different interviews, but we either adopted a saying, whether we got it from somebody else or we made it up, but the three ways that people treat you would be well, badly, or not at all. And and the badly was pretty bad, but that's easy to understand. But not being treated at all, that's that idea of ignoring you, denying your humanity. And for Godfrey and me, this was particularly a point of stress, although less for me and for Godfrey, because I'd grown up in the South. But to be always first highly visible and a super somebody, and then at any given point a super nobody, and that's that's, you talk about stress in the engineering sense. I see my teammate Glenn Locke here in the audience. But that's a super stress. That's a special point that can have an impact on you in terms of creating a sense of negative reaction, be it rage or anger or whatnot.
Right. Andrew, one of the things that I liked most about the book, among many, was the fact that you sought to tell not only the external story of the drama that happened on the court or whatever, but also the internal story, the struggles in the heart of Perry or Godfrey or and other students on campus too. Talk about your approach to that a little bit. Did you think about it that way? Did you think about that you wanted to get into the heart of the experience, the emotional heart of it, as well as to describe it, from the outside looking in?
Absolutely. I wanted to tell the story in as complete a picture as possible, which included things like the internal and external struggle, but also the sports side of the story and the civil rights side of the story, the Nashville side of the story, the Southern, the American side of the story. There are many, many layers to the story I wanted to tell. And Professor Jones would probably attest to this. When I first approached it as a student, I was just a Vanderbilt basketball fan that was interested in this Vanderbilt basketball player, you know, and it wasn't until I became much more mature, and by the time I was writing the book, that I really, really got that there was so much more to it than that. And it was one benefit to actually taking 8 years to complete the book that I was able to get, I hope Perry would agree with this, deeper into the story and deeper into the individuals that I was interviewing. You know, as an author, usually you get just a couple cracks at it, you know, but
Right.
Because I was working a job and getting married and having kids, it took 8 years to complete this book, and in hindsight, that was the best thing. As long as Perry was patient, waiting 8 years for this book to come out, I probably interviewed Perry 100 times. We emailed constantly. Would see him in person, call him on the phone. Same thing with Godfrey, the same thing with 10 or 15 other black classmates of Perry's. And, you know, I ended up interviewing, I think, 80-something people for the book. And having a chance to go back to them multiple times allowed me to not just tell the surface story.
Right, yeah. I was a very minor character, and you interviewed me at least 3 times. So, so you were definitely thorough. Perry, you know, you and I have talked about this a little bit since then too, and in 1968, when I graduated from Vanderbilt, if somebody had asked me, who is the student on campus that you admire the most, I might very well have said Perry Wallace. And yet, you and I didn't know each other all that well on campus. We've gotten to know each other better since then. And I've often thought about how many of us, though we admired not only your skills on the court, but also the way you carried yourself as a peer and as a fellow student, we didn't do as much as we could have to make you feel as welcome as we wanted you to feel. And I just wonder how you feel about that all of these years later. Not just, you know, not to make it too personal, and yet it is personal because it was a time that mattered. We saw what you were doing, and yet there was this subtle thing that happened that made you feel isolated. And just reflect on that a little bit, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, you know, first and foremost, nobody owed me or anybody else the obligation to make sure that I was okay, to come and check on me and to make sure that my life was going well. That's not what we were talking about. And a lot of times people think that that's what I and others were talking about. What we were talking about was that the way the campus was, the social structure of the campus was such that there were not real opportunities for meaningful interaction. And that was it. And we really didn't have, we really had no gripe, complaint per se with the Greek system. But that happened to be the sort of central means and mode of social interaction. But, you know, for my part, because had I gone to school at Fisk or Tennessee State or at Morehouse, I wouldn't have joined a fraternity, and that, not because I didn't like them. It wasn't exactly something I was interested in. But when you substitute that, you make that more limited and limiting institutional form, the basis and the way in which people got along with each other and carried out their lives and developed personally on a campus, then that's not fair. See, so what we were really talking about was having ways in which we could honestly interact and grow as young people, given the fact that a college education would consist of more than merely doing well in your courses, as important as that was. But the last thing that I was interested in was for somebody to come in and kind of make special arrangements and take special pains to make sure that my life was going okay. That just basically wasn't what I liked.
Frye, can I add on to that?
Yeah.
This idea of classmates of Perry's, that it takes sometimes decades to come to this realization of, what they could have done. For those of you who have read the book, it's the first page, the first chapter of the book, where Bob Warren, and
yeah.
Perry completes this story beautifully, but Bob Warren was a teammate of Perry's, often a roommate on road trips, who went on to play professionally in the American Basketball Association, the ABA. And in his pro days, he had many black teammates. At Vanderbilt, he had one. Growing up, I think he said he only knew 2 black people his entire life before he got to Vanderbilt. And so he said that it was, over the course of sort of growing up in his post-Vanderbilt days, that it dawned on him what Perry must have been going through. And so here it is, almost 40 years after they were both gone from Vanderbilt, that Bob Warren happened to be on a business trip to Washington, D.C. And he took a cab over to American University Law School and took the elevator up to the 4th floor and walked to Professor Wallace's office and walked in the door and said, Perry, forgive me, there's so much more I could have done. And that's the way I start the book, and I think that Perry would say that he's had many instances similar to that with other folks, but he's got some nice things to say about Bob Warren specifically in that situation.
Talk about Bob.
Yeah. Well,
Good guy.
how ironic it would be that a person of such character and goodness and decency would come to me or anybody else to apologize for anything. And that's the kind of person he was. And it almost, I guess it almost hurt me in ways to think that he would have felt the need or have spent any time feeling any pain on that, in that vein. That's the thing about it. The people who didn't need to apologize, the people who were decent to me, the people who had no problem with playing with me, practicing with me. We have, who were rooming with me, and Bob did, Gene did, and various others. That's not who I'm talking about. I'm not talking about also people like Frye and various other people, who were really just fine. These people would speak to me when we came into each other. They didn't have, again, no obligation to come to make sure that I was all right. You can tell that I have I'm offended by the notion of that. I'm not looking for that kind of special treatment. What I'm talking about was the ones who really consciously and premeditatedly, well, you can tell I'm a lawyer, ignored me and the other black students. I won't talk about the ones who were abusive. You know what they're like, but I will mention in passing that they were there too. They tended to exist more in the shadows because they needed to come and catch you when they bullied and when they threatened. They would do it walking across campus when they saw that maybe nobody else was there, going up in elevators, and in isolated instances they bullied, they threatened, and the like. And some of them are still in town, because sometimes they'll come and let me know in events like this that I'm still here. And then you have the others who clearly made their, I wrote an essay about that with an event that happened just a few years ago in the Chapter 16 Humanities Journal. I named it Plantation Drive-By. That's the idea. But those two categories, the outright bullies, and then the people who were just plain the other category of mean-spiritedness, where they consciously want to deny your humanity. But the other categories of people, we just happen not to have had that much interaction. They happen not to have been that aware. I have no complaint with them. As a matter of fact, I really appreciate their presence. They have no idea how helpful they were to me, just being civil and just being decent. I've run into people, at alumni events and so on and so forth, and they've raised this very same point. And I've said that, you want to apologize to me, and I'm not going to let you. What I need to thank you, because those little pieces of civility just allowed me to nickel and dime my way to a richer experience and to a certain type of survival.
What about some of the adult figures on campus? Chancellor Hurd, Coach Skinner, and what about professors who were helpful to you? I know at least one of those professors is seated fairly close to the front of the audience right now.
There he is, right there. He's modest about it, but these people were crucial because they were leaders and they gave us a sense of hope. Not to mention their own knowledge and wisdom and insights, and their willingness to stand and to take a stand. Also, and sometimes people are surprised. Sometimes they're surprised, sometimes they're not. But Chancellor Hurd and Coach Skinner, in their own way, I felt just fine about what they were trying to do in this sense. Chancellor Hurd really got this party started in a positive sense, that he took the steps and initiated the steps to have a university of such high quality reach for higher quality and express vision and courage. And when you do that, you take your chances, because a lot of times you're going to take hits, because are you going to be able to do it perfectly? I don't think so. And so you take a real chance, and you take a chance that a lot of people simply will not understand. But Chancellor Hurd and I had a very, very good relationship. I had a great deal of admiration for him, and there were ways in which he helped me that it didn't make sense to have it be known publicly, but they were there. He wrote a recommendation for me. He was one of my recommenders to law school, and he was helpful in various other ways. Coach Skinner, I would wrap up by saying that here's a man who was as decent as they came, and he did what he could. And if one said, well, that wasn't nearly enough, I would say, well, yes, but what realities are you dealing with? Just as with my teammates, people have heard me say I'm protective of them, not defensive, but protective, and with good reason, because you expect some teenage boys to step up and be a Pee Wee Reese. How old was Pee Wee when he put his arm around Jackie Robinson's shoulder? And then it's wonderful, the people who are willing to put their lives and their futures in danger, but you can't build progress in society expecting everybody to do that, especially some young boys who are teenagers or 20 or 21.
I'd like to add something about Chancellor
Yes.
Hurd, or two things. First is the direct link between Chancellor Hurd and the civil rights movement on one side and Perry's arrival at Vanderbilt on the other.
Right.
And Perry, as a 12-year-old kid, would walk downtown Nashville to watch the sit-ins at the lunch counters. And who was leading the sit-ins but Reverend James Lawson from the Vanderbilt Divinity School. And Vanderbilt's official response before Chancellor Hurd was here, when they found out Lawson's role, was to expel him from the Divinity School. And so the university reached a low point in terms of its national reputation in the wake of that.
Right.
Chancellor Hurd has hired a much more progressive New South type of leader to come in and open up the university. And he understood, and his daughter Cornelia is here, who I'd like to recognize also. Connie, thank you for being here. She told me so much about her father and introduced me to him, which was very meaningful to me. But he was a Philadelphia A's baseball fan, and such an intellectual, but also understood the role that sports played in American life. And he understood that if he wanted to signal that the university was changing that one way to do that would be in the area of sports. And so he called Coach Skinner into his office at Kirkland Hall. Coach Skinner thought it was just going to be a meeting about expanding the balconies at Memorial Gym. And surprise, surprise, he said, you know, Roy, we're now admitting black students to the university. You can recruit a black player to the basketball team. And in fact, I would like you to. And the interesting thing about that is Coach Skinner was certainly not, you know, this person bent on social change. He was a Kentucky farm boy, you know, but he said, okay. And meanwhile, in Kentucky, the president of the University of Kentucky was having similar conversations with Adolph Rupp, and Rupp resisted it. You know, and so Coach Skinner and Chancellor Hurd do deserve some credit for the leadership that they showed.
Right. Before we open it up to everybody else, and since you brought Adolph Rupp, Perry, talk a little bit about the dunk. one of your weapons on the basketball floor that turned out to be withheld for a little while. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, we're talking about the so-called no-dunk rule that was put in place at a point in the 1960s, maybe at about 1967 at some point, that had the effect of making it illegal to dunk during at least during the period that I played varsity basketball, and which happened to be my best move. So obviously, I was offended by this. I didn't necessarily see it as being personally directed to me, because I didn't see myself as being that large a figure in the scheme of things. It just seemed that that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Lou Alcindor, I guess at the time, was such an ominous player that he inspired this kind of fear and intimidation that David Big Daddy Lattin at Texas Western, that humiliated the Kentucky teams, and David Lattin, who, as Andrew notes, came to Tennessee State. He came to Tennessee State first, and I got a chance to play ball with and against him, or in and around him, because basically it was just basically when he went down the lane to dunk the basketball, everybody had a one-word admonition: run. Wonderful, wonderful story. But Andrew makes the point nicely, and some others do, that while Coach Rupp might not necessarily have had reason to be so afraid of having Alcindor personally come and dunk on his teams, and not necessarily to have David Lattin come again, because they certainly weren't going to schedule a game with him. And maybe David Lattin was moving on into the pros, but he would have to contend with me. And the thing that seemed to bring things to a head was that freshman year, where we were playing a game up at Kentucky, and our freshman team was playing, and the ball bounced off the rim, and I got it sort of in the paint and went up and dunked it. Over Dan Issel, who was one of the big stars there. And although this was the freshman team with freshman players and freshman coaches, I saw this man on the side just sort of inveighing and over to the side complaining and whatnot. And I looked over and I said, that's Coach Rupp. That's Coach Rupp. And also strange, because his assistants recruited me, but Coach Rupp didn't. Harry Lancaster and Joe B. Hall, who were wonderful men. I liked them very, very much. But Coach Rupp hadn't been willing. So I only knew him by the pictures that I'd seen. But there he was down there on the floor, just as angry as can be, because I had dunked the basketball. And I was just thinking, well, what's not to like about the dunk? that the ghost of Adolph Rupp. I'm sorry, Coach. I can't dunk anymore anyway, so don't worry. Don't worry. It won't. Nothing to worry about here. What was not to talk too long, but I just think that it is noteworthy that at the end of the 4 years, Coach Rupp coached me in an all-star game. And this may have been a Kentucky-Tennessee all-star game, one of those mini all-star games that are held after the regular basketball season when the seniors are looking to be seen by the pros, the scouts, and the like. And Coach Rupp actually coached me, and we talked. And he was cordial. He was very, very nice. He offered actually to help me in trying to get placed with a pro team and so on and so forth. I don't know if the story was told by that point and the point had been made. Maybe that's what it was. But it was just an interesting, magical conversation. We stood out on the court talking and having this conversation, and it was cordial, and that was fine, but there was so much history behind that.
Let's open it up to questions from the audience for a few minutes. There's a microphone there, and it looks like people are already in line.
My name is George Hill. I'm a professor over in the School of Medicine. First of all, I really wanted to thank the library for having this panel. And Mr. Wallace, I can't thank you enough. Mr. Maraniss, I can't thank you enough. I actually was at UK from 67 to 69 trying to help Joe B. Hall and Adolph Rupp recruit black ball players. And I wasn't successful. But I did see you play in Memorial Gym at that time, which was during the time that you were there. I have two questions, one for each. One is, Mr. Wallace, could you comment on the strength that you gained from Schrader Lane or Pearl High School or Coach Ridley to accomplish what you did later? And my other question, Mr. Maraniss, I'm actually writing a book on Levi Watkins, who was the first African American to be in the medical school. And he came in 1966 and graduated in 70. I wondered if you could comment, and you've already touched on it, what changed the climates of that 1966? Deans were thinking that this is something that needs to be done. You pointed out that Chancellor Hurd really had a lot to do with it, but I'd be interested in your other thoughts on why then. And thank you both very much.
Well, for my part on your first question, sure. Faith and family and community, and people will hear me say this all the time until they get tired of it, but I won't get tired of it. Faith and family and community were the foundation, and that faith and family and community are important. And I make those points because a lot of times you come from communities like mine, and people hear the bad news and not realize how much richness that is there, and that I'm not the only one who is a successful product. And then for Pearl High and Coach Ridley, we're just talking about just a high quality and tough, highly competitive experience. And there were others. I mean, I could trace and start with you with the playground. Playground basketball is by definition tough, rough basketball. And I was the type of person who nobody thought that I would that I could survive in those settings, because it clearly was not my type of personality. But by spending the time in those settings, I got toughened up, and then getting over there to Pearl High School, and I paid tribute to Coach Ridley last night, and I pay tribute to him every time I get a chance to talk about him. He was just a wonderful man and just such a fine person. he knew the game from every angle, and he coached you from every angle, from what types of exercises you did, to strategy in the game, to strategy in going to predominantly white institutions. And so it made an invaluable contribution that really helped me here.
Andrew, you want to
Yes.
address your piece
I mean,
of that?
I think Chancellor Hurd is the key to the whole thing, and I think that he deeply believed, he was quoted many times and gave many speeches around town, that the race issue was the central issue of the country, and that if you were going to talk that way, you needed to solve things in your own backyard. You couldn't just talk about it. You know, you had to do something at your own university. Also, he had just, to be slightly more cynical about it, launched a major fundraising drive at the university, and major national foundations were a key component of that fundraising campaign. And I think he understood that you couldn't have a segregated university and a segregated athletic department and be attracting national dollars, especially from the Northeast. From the athletic standpoint, the SEC was, by that point, it was an untenable position in some ways, or sticking out like a sore thumb. I mean, everybody else had integrated, even the Atlantic Coast Conference. You know, people point to the Texas Western Kentucky game as turning the tide. Perry was already being recruited by Kentucky and Vanderbilt by the time of that game, and watched that game, still having not made his decision that he was coming to Vanderbilt. He was watching it with some interest on both sides of the equation. In professional sports, Bill Russell was already the player coach of the Boston Celtics before there was a single African-American player in the SEC. And, you know, certainly nothing is inevitable. It only looks that way in hindsight. But there were many things happening in various parts of society that the time was coming, and Perry Wallace, in so many ways, as a great athlete and a great student and a hometown person, became a logical choice for Vanderbilt to pursue. It was just a question of whether Vanderbilt would be appealing to Perry.
Next person in line back there.
First off, thanks to all three of you. This is a real treat to be able to see this. I'm Max Hers. I'm a sophomore here. And my question is for Mr. Wallace. I'm just curious about what your interactions with the media were like while you were playing here, and whether or not you feel that they gave your story the due attention it deserved, and if they portrayed you positively, accurately, things like that. Just what types of articles came out? What were your dealings with sports writers like while you were playing here?
Relationships were generally good. What happened was that there are just certain things that were going to be pretty hard for them to write about with any factuality and completeness, and that is the problems there down in the South. But I think that they were positively inclined, and I think that they were hopeful. I mean, John Bibb, Waxo Green, people like that. These were people who, as best I could tell, felt favorably towards me. What just happened was that it was just going to be hard for them. And by the way, you could look around the country at that time and ask whether or not many in the media were going to be able to be as truthful about problems of race.
Can I tell the Frank Sutherland story?
Yeah.
So there's a key moment in the book and in Perry's life that involves the local media. It wasn't a sports writer. It was Frank Sutherland, who was a reporter for the Tennessean at the time and went on to become the editor of the paper. And as Perry approached the end of his basketball career and his academic career at Vanderbilt, he felt that the Vanderbilt community was becoming a little bit too quick or happy to wrap things up. That we have integrated the university, the basketball team. Perry's completed his 4 years. Everything's great. This is over with. And what Perry understood was that things were just beginning. We were only beginning to start to address some issues or answer some questions, and that he had a lot on his mind and a moral obligation to inform the people that would come after him, what his experience had been like as a pioneer. And so leading up to his last game, he approached the newspaper, the Tennessean, and the day after his last game, he sat down with Frank Sutherland and gave a very honest interview about what his experience had been like. And it was a very courageous thing for Perry to do. because what he said was he knew he was writing his ticket out of town. And here he had been valedictorian and high school basketball star, double major in engineering, and a college basketball star, all in his hometown. He was sort of the all-American kid who could have been setting himself up for a bright future in his hometown. But he knew by telling the truth at that time that Nashville wasn't ready, white Nashville wasn't ready to hear it. And so for him to tell that story was incredibly courageous, and, you know, it was then, he's never been back here, you know, as a resident of this town. It was 20 years before he was invited back to the university to talk about what his experience had been like. And the day after that story ran in the paper, phones were ringing off the hook at the Tennessean with Vanderbilt fans calling to cancel their subscriptions to the paper, calling Perry ungrateful for what Vanderbilt had done for him. You know, and it was gratifying for me in talking to David Williams, the athletic director currently, who said, you know, Perry did more for Vanderbilt than we ever could have done for him. You know, and so things have changed, but, you know, certainly in 1970, Perry knew that what he was saying would not go over so well in all corners of the community.
Thanks so much.
I remember being a young reporter writing about Perry at that time also for another publication, and it was easy to get quotes from people who declared that Perry Wallace was an ingrate and so forth. I remember one quote, though, to the contrary, and it was so typical of the way Coach Skinner would phrase things. He said, "I think Perry was trying to help us." And it was just very simple and direct, and I think it took about 20 years institutionally before people began to agree with Coach Skinner on that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir.
My name is Gregory Taylor, and I am a writer for the Spiritual Herald newspaper. And I must say this before I ask my question. I would not have been able to compose this question if it had not been for Dr. David Jones at the Schrader Lane Church of Christ. Also, I attend the Osher Long Life Learning, and one of the students there shared something with me about my life that I had not known. And this is the question. Dr. David Jones said after the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the March in Washington, and he said he'd been waiting 50 years to say this, that they were celebrating up there and they were singing the wrong songs and they were making the wrong speeches. And I thanked him after that because I'm 59 years old, and when I first heard the voice of Dr. MLK Jr., my first thought was, this man's life is going to be in the way of me growing up. And since then, in between, this thought was my life has been a counter-narrative to Dr. MLK Jr. And since Ferguson, you know, that has proven something that I've known all along. So I'm simply saying this, based on what Dr. Jones said, and I'm witnessing something today at 59, that it appeared that the American African community has went about getting their rights the wrong way. And I was wondering, can you speak to this? And I'm not a member of the Schrader Lane Church of Christ. I just go there. I'm a Baptist minister who's under persuasion I can be a better member than those who are there.
So you're saying that the statement was that that the African American community is going about getting its rights the wrong way. That's a long conversation. I'd have to get, you know, I mean, this is, I don't think the right time or place, because I'd have to get more information. And I'm not trying to avoid the question. I'd be happy to address the question, but there are just so many clarifications that would have to be made. And perhaps we can just talk a bit after the after this session. I'd be happy to talk to you.
I'm Frank Dobson. I'm director of the Bishop Joseph Johnson Black Cultural Center here at Vanderbilt, and have spoken with both Andrew and Perry, if I may use your first names. And I just want to thank you again for this book and this story and this narrative. And one of the things that I'm going to piggyback on the previous questioner, because as many of you know, today on our campus there were protests regarding Ferguson. There are protests all throughout the country in respect to the verdict. But when you read this book, and I've read the book, there are these interesting narratives, your life, your story, Perry, and even, for example, the responses to the assassination of Dr. King and the way in which Perry Wallace and Godfrey Dillard responded to that. And I think that this book offers up for the young people who are struggling with questions of race, questions of justice and injustice, that this book really offers up an example of reconciliation, an example of people coming together. The book begins and ends with those examples of reconciliation that were talked about. And so I'm asking either Perry or Andrew or both of you, can you talk a little bit about that aspect of the book, the theme of reconciliation, and how that seems to offer up an example for young people today who are struggling with all of the things that are in the news?
Yeah. Well, and thank you very much for that, Frank. Well, here it is. As I was saying last night, I think it was, that I think Mandela got it right, that truth and reconciliation are just powerful phenomena. First, of course, truth, because truth without, reconciliation without truth is not reconciliation. It's just playing around. But to really try to move towards some really coming together. And I would just close, because I want to hear Andrew's points on this, but it's so easy just not to get along. Is that a song or something? But, no, it's so easy to fall in love, I guess. But see, it might be easy to do that too, but it's so easy not to get along and not to understand one another. It's a lot harder to understand one another, and that is our. But that's that's going to be our source of salvation, our source of a future, our source of strength. Whether in America, and I was, I've been, as you all have been, in different parts of the world, and sometimes I talk about my Nigerian experience and that sort of thing. I won't branch off into that, but it's very easy not to get along. And it's very easy to hold grudges and to get mad and to kind of like go through all, the rest of your life, and, and you can slam, that doggone Vanderbilt and this person and that person. And people have moved along, some people have passed on, and the like. And what have you produced in doing so? But to have the willingness to find a way to be understanding. And part of it has to do with just understanding how imperfect we are, and that we all are, and that you make mistakes, and to try to have some perspective, some sense of goodwill, and some sense of a willingness to reach out and put things together, because you're talking about people of goodwill, and you're talking about people with really the same good, positive objectives.
The only thing I would add is the reconciliation aspect is very interesting to me, and this week has been an incredible experience for me since Perry's been in town. He arrived yesterday, and I don't know how Perry feels about it, but it's been extremely heartwarming for me. MLK High School, which is the old Pearl High School building, billed Perry's return there today as Perry Wallace comes home. And in some way, that's how I feel about what this whole week is about, whether it's here at Vanderbilt or it was over there at the high school or at the downtown library last night that had a crowd of 400 people from all corners of Nashville, gave Perry Wallace a standing ovation. And I feel like that's what he has deserved from Nashville since 1970. And as the author of this book, I told Perry the other day, you approach a book with some sense that you need to maintain this journalistic detachment from the subject, which is really hard for me to do when you're writing about Perry Wallace, somebody that I admire so much. I wrote what I believe is an extremely truthful and honest book, but when you're dealing with Perry, you can't help but love this man. And so the response that he's received in Nashville so far has been probably some of the happiest moments of my life.
Before we do the next question from the microphone, there's a gentleman here who's raised his hand the whole time.
Bob Douglas.
Ask your question, and then and if people.
Douglas Smith, and me, Perry Wallace, give us the real good details of how the Roy Skinner recruited you, and who were your childhood heroes that you wanted to emulate?
Yeah, well, Roy Skinner's approach was nuanced and complex and mystical. He was honest and told truth. Yeah, how's that for nuance and complexity and all kinds of mystery and that sort of thing? He was a decent man from the country, and my parents were decent people from the country. And in our home, although I was born in the city, but our parents made sure we spent time in the country. And you go to a home like an immigrant home, I guess, from another country. You have the culture of where you're from, and they always talked about wanting to go back to the country and get a home when they retired. But you have those kinds of values, and so we met on a plane of common values. And my parents were not. They were very nice and civil and all of that, but they looked at you and they judged you like a hawk. And you weren't going to get anything past them. And when my father looked, you could tell that he was judging you like a hawk. My mother, true to fashion in the genderized sense, and I'm a lot more like her, but she would be very pleasant and sit in the background, judging you like a hawk. and that's what that's exactly what I do. And it worked, didn't it? But the idea was that this man, it was clear that he really somehow in this this complex world of competitive world of major college sports on this big fancy campus, that he wanted to maintain to the extent that he could, sometimes to his detriment in the sense of his not getting the full credit for what he did and the power of what he did and the power of who he was. Naismith Hall of Fame. Naismith Hall of Fame. Thank you, Gene. Naismith Hall of Fame. But we related in the sense of very common values, the same values. And this was not just naive stuff, superficial stuff, and that's what helped me move along. Who were my idols? Wilt Chamberlain was my first idol, and it's just because he just seemed so masterful and strong, and brought so much. Obviously, I didn't know the man when I went up to the fall camp of the 76ers. I saw him in exhibition games and whatnot. But just there was, in a world where there was so much uncertainty and so much weakness in the sense of the weakness of your position in society and powerlessness, that he seemed to express such clear, unapologetic power, and in a beautiful, masterful, conquering way. And so that felt just right for me as I saw it. It just really seemed just fine. And after that, Bill Bradley and Cassie Russell were my more particular idols. We were a lot closer in size, and Bill Bradley, of course, was a wonderful role model in terms of the student athlete model, and then Cassie, very similar size. I met him up at the University of Michigan, and in terms of the kind of style of play that I wanted to emulate, we were very similar in size and build and that sort of thing. The same combination of strength, jumping ability, and the like. So that's my answer.
Good. There are two more people in line, it looks like. Let's take those two questions, and then it's been a full discussion.
For gender reasons, I have to lower the microphone. My name is Ronnie Steinberg. I'm a retired Vanderbilt professor. I wanted to ask you, Professor Wallace, you said in passing that there was still a lot going on and a lot to learn. And I wondered if you might reflect upon the system at Vanderbilt, the system of student athletes, and what, at this point, your experience as a pioneer can help those who are possibly in the third generation of integration, especially being a teacher who taught very diverse classes that continue to be very segregated in the way students sat, in the way they interacted with each other, and so forth. So I wonder what you have to offer us about those issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, the segregation, internal segregation, where you have everybody as a student on the same campus, but they're living separate lives and not having a lot of interaction. Of course, that has roots in the society itself, which still is, there's too much segregation in effect in society, too much of a failure on our part to give our young people experiences where they get to know and feel comfortable with people from different backgrounds. And then finally, what institutions do you have? What institutions, how is the social, what is the makeup of the social fabric of Vanderbilt University for these students who still need help in learning how to get along? I had the opportunity to dedicate the first building of the Commons a few years ago, and dedicated to Walter Murray, a dear friend and one of our wonderful students, and later an employee at the university. The idea was to try to continue to encourage student interaction, not based in a system like the Greek system, but that really tried to encourage this interaction. But they came from the outside world, and that outside world has all those challenges that we know that they have, and they've been segregated, and they have those instincts. And often they just come in, and if nobody facilitates, if the structure, university, does not find ways of facilitating that interaction, then you're going to continue to have that segregation. For the athletes, I would simply say that, well, first, you got to remember that I always respected Vanderbilt's standards because Vanderbilt chose to have integrity, in its athletic programs, and chose to have programs where and sometimes to you could look at the football team's difficulties, and in part what you could see was that the university was not willing to recruit these guys who just could not read, and God bless them, because we know why, but really that had standards and had a sense of integrity. I think that it's key to try to become a part of the national debate and dialogue, to spread that message, to propagate that message. That's part of, that was one of the reasons that I was willing to reconnect with the university, because it provides me with a platform that I haven't had for decades. I've tried to go and spread the word and talk about student athletes and whatnot, and who's going to listen to a black man? And so I needed, and this is going to be a little tricky, but we're getting toward the end, and I'm going to tell it to you anyway. Out in the country and even sometimes in the city when I was growing up, here and there the police would stop you and they would ask you, who are your white folks? Is it all right if I continue with that? Thank you, thank you. Because that worked for you, and if you were trying to just make sure that you made it to the, I see my old sisters are looking at, I had to look at them for permission, because when there's a certain power that people have over you when they change your diapers. You can't, because you need to get permission. You need to get permission. But, and I say this because I've gone all over America with great success by having some point of reference that people recognize. Sometimes it was that, well, I'm in Washington, D.C., and I work in Mayor Walter Washington's office, a black man, but I work in the office of the mayor. So I took that old question, which worked, by the way, and even if sometimes we made up the white man's name. I work for Mr. Nelson. And I'm sorry, I don't mean any offense, but that's real, and I think we're being real here. But it would be that I work for Mayor Walter Washington. I work at the Justice Department, and I'd keep that big ID with the picture there. So Vanderbilt and this acclaim has provided me with a platform for doing something that I wanted to do, which is not to glory and bask in the spotlight. Everybody who knows me knows that I care nothing about that. What the idea is to get a chance to actually talk and be heard about something that that makes good sense. And this notion about student athletes and whatnot, it's obvious. The need is obvious. UNC, and if they open that box a little further around the country, guess what they're going to find? That is not just UNC.
Last question, excuse me, last question here, I think, for the public part of this. We have a book signing afterward, is that right?
That's right.
So we need to get to the book signing, too. Yes, ma'am.
Actually, I don't have a question. I have a comment, an expression of gratitude, as it were. I graduated from, and I did my best. I'm doing my best not to get emotional about this. From Pearl High School, a year after you graduated from Vanderbilt. I had the great good fortune of then following in your footsteps here at Vanderbilt, but to get a law degree instead of an undergraduate degree. I want you to know that we remember you at Pearl. You and Walter were the Gold Dust twins for us. Okay? You were our heroes even then, as well as you are now. You were our inspiration then, as you are now. And I'm so eternally grateful that now this story is being shared with everyone, because they all need to know. They all need to know how strong, how brave, how brilliant, how charismatic, and how loving and giving you are, and what you provided for us, because we wouldn't be here without you. So thank you.
That's a good place to stop.
I think she is too.